Hello and welcome back for our After Dark Q&A. Thank you for your support as always. We hope you enjoyed the show. And we're still joined by Zarina Zabriskie on the blue sofa and obviously Peter Jukes. You're still here.
On a blue chair. I never get to sit on the sofa. Why don't I never get the sofa?
I don't know. It's for, it's a bit more, it's too relaxed.
It's
for you,
very
comfortable.
Exactly.
It's a bit too relaxed for you, I think.
I probably would slouch. My mother always used to say, don't slouch, Peter. So I'm sitting upright on my chair.
That's good. So, as always, we're going to be going through your questions over the next 15 to 20 minutes. So do send any in if you think there's something you want to ask Zarina or any of us about any of the topics that we've been discussing this evening. But first of all, we'll kick off with Julie, who says that she doesn't believe that Boris Johnson could ever become sort of an authoritarian dictator because he doesn't have the energy for it. But whichever Conservative could be a dictator in waiting, is this view extreme? So if it's Boris Johnson might not have the personal characteristics to become a dictator, but Julie's suggesting that conservatism and a conservative politician has it in them to be that way. Is she being extreme?
It's a really good question, and I think we would need to have a psychologist on board for that. And I think psychology is a big part of political analysis, and it's often overlooked. So I did not do the psychological analysis of Boris Johnson, but I read a lot of psychological analysis of dictators of the past and present. And there are certain qualities and there are certain features that are there, not necessarily conservative, actually. There is a lot of people who start as liberals and end up as dictators. Fidel Castro, I mean, you name it, and all the Bolsheviks from my old country. So not necessarily conservative, but I would probably address or readdress this question to a psychologist that we might bring here, and that could be an interesting discussion.
We must get one, as somebody who studies the psychology of power. In fact, I was talking to Vaughan Smith, founder of the Frontline Club, and he's got very interested in that. Now, I would go back to what Paul Mason says about the architecture of thought, this sort of extreme. He talks about the architecture of fascist thinking, and that you could argue, that the classic example is Hitler, obviously, that his personality was a reflection of the needs of society. They felt crushed. There was an angry Austrian corporal, and he could caught the zeitgeist, but could anybody else have done it? Mussolini was a was a brutal dictator, but he wasn't personally responsible for the Holocaust, the Shoah. His form of racism was milder. I think the only thing I would suggest with Boris Johnson, people said the same about Trump. He's lazy, he wants money, he doesn't want to stay. 2 years, they said 2 years, he won't go, he'll go, claiming he's ill. When he came to leave power, he was willing to cause an insurrection and cause, I'm not saying but his supporters to hang Mike Pence. So I think we have to be careful that these people who seem like to be not very much into power, and when they're there, it's very difficult to get them away from it.
Interesting that you bring up Hitler, of course, who comes to mind, and I can refer people to a fascinating piece that was commissioned for the former, at that time not CIA yet, but a psychological department, actually psychoanalyst department of American Secret Service in 1942. And they delivered a fascinating analysis of Hitler's personality during his lifetime with the Freudian depths and Freudian references that makes for the great reading. I actually have it on my Medium little excerpt, and it leads to this unduly forgotten file, which I totally recommend. And speaking of power, Putin actually infamously said that nothing is addictive as power. So here you go.
I was going to say that I think it's interesting that we look at these terms like dictators and authoritarianism, and I think sometimes we give them capital letters when actually take away the parentheses, they're just words. Someone can be dictatorial because they want to hang on to power. And my argument would be that for the very reason that Boris Johnson has a propensity towards being dictatorial is because he's lazy. It's because he can't be bothered to do much and is not really bothered about policy, just rhetoric. Inherent in that is a vulnerability, which I think then requires a lot of control fostered around himself in order to keep him in power. And this is something Dominic Cummings has said recently, whether it's in a Spectator article or on TV or on Twitter. He's always talking about the fact that he was saying to Johnson, you like the fact that this is all chaotic, that number 10 is full of chaos. And apparently Boris Johnson said to him, yes, I do, because then they look to me as some sort of king.
It was about COVID, wasn't it?
It's about,
sort things out or the chaos, no, but when there's chaos.
Yeah, so often these things go together. The fact that he seems so sort of uninterested in actually the duties of his position could be a reason why he becomes more dictatorial.
It's a kind of studied negligence, a kind of organized incompetence. I mean, it's not Hitler, and I'm not making that. But if you look at the Third Reich, it was often incredibly chaotic competing, of which the Führer had to make the final decision. The only other thing I say about Johnson, and this relates to what Vaughan Smith was talking about, is narcissism. It's people who lack empathy. It's all about themselves. That's a common trait, I say, with Trump, Putin, and Johnson. And there is, reportedly, I don't know, I only met him once. He was a bit cold with me, but why wouldn't he be? Quite a temper. These people suddenly, and that's how the dictatorial nature. They're crazy, they're chaotic, they're lazy, they're affable. If they're in control, then they lose their temper.
So Jessica says she doesn't have a question for Zarina, but she does have this. She wants to say how inspirational you are and how she finds you very inspiring, that you keep fighting on regardless of the consequences. That's from Jessica.
Thank you, Jessica. I'm really, I find people in Russia and Belarus really inspiring for me, because sure, there are some discomforts for us journalists here in the West, but this is nothing compared to what these people have endured on a daily basis. And so I accept gratefully your compliment and pass it on to people who inspire all of us. Thank you.
An inspiring generation.
Lewis is asking, Zarina, do you feel in danger from the Russian state?
It's a good question, and you hear that quite a bit when you're Russian originally. And, I'm an American citizen for a long time, but I'm a journalist who's writing about these matters. Occasionally, I get threats, like most of us. I think all of us get threats, and it could be the death threats, or it could be lawfare threats. And I get both on...
Which threats? The second one?
Of trials,
legal threats.
Yeah, legal threats. Yeah, lawfare.
Lawfare, sorry.
Yeah. So both are unpleasant, and but I think it comes with the territory. I think once you decide that you're going to do that, there could be occasional hacking. It happens. It's a part of the job. So, yes, I suppose. But not as much as other people. Again, these people fighting the regime.
I mean, one point about that, isn't it? People wondered why, and a lot of skeptics about Putin's involvement. Now, I think it's fairly well proven, but especially in parts of the Labour Party. Why would he bother to go and poison an ex-dissident, Sergei Skripal, in a military town? Why would he bother? And what people forget, that terrorism, if that kind of state terror, is often exemplary. So you scare, especially this was just after, Manafort and all the revelations, the Mueller inquiry. You target, they didn't kill the Skripals, but they nearly did, in a safe British military town. It's as an example, isn't it, to anybody else who's thinking of talking.
Exactly. It's a message, and I think Luke Hardin speaks about it in his multiple articles and in his book, that it's a message. And Anastasia Vassilieva spoke about it yesterday in her interview about Putin instilling fear. And she compared it to cancer. She said it's oncology, being a doctor. Fear could be devastating. It could actually ruin and distract any opposition and any resistance, and it's very effective. So killing somebody on another country, powerful country territory, is a message.
Aaron says, Zarina, do you see a shift in that there are now more parallels between America, the UK, and Russia than there were before? And I guess one of the questions I really have following on from that is, Peter and I have discussed before on the show that it'd be interesting to see how much the political narrative moves in this country towards looking at the state as a form of oligarchy. You know, actually what's happening with the cronyism around Boris Johnson and all of this sort of thing is that there are, you know, a lot of power and wealth concentrated in very few people, and, you know, they're all sort of benefiting themselves. I mean, is that one of the ways that all the three of these countries have sort of shifted in the last few years, or do you think there are other reasons?
It's a great question, and to answer the depths would take another show, really, because there's so many dimensions to it. We can take political, and we can look at the developments of the recent years. When we have these dictatorial, authoritarian figures, populists like Trump or Johnson or Putin.
Orban, yeah.
So politically, yes, there's definitely some sort of shift there with a unhealthy climate, with all these cult figures of which we talked today in the show, conspiracy theories, this really unhealthy political climate that can be felt globally. And I travel quite a bit, and I feel it everywhere these days, and you don't have to travel to feel it. You can just go on internet, on Twitter, and it's right there. So politically, then economically, definitely yes, and especially being here in London, and we talked about it in depth before, and we wrote about it, because there's just so much money from Russian oligarchs parked in London and in Great Britain in general. I mean, I can never walk in Tate Modern again without seeing Blavatnik wing. Blavatnik is one of allegedly close to Putin.
Allegedly, he denies this.
He denies this. We all know that. So allegedly, I'm not making here any verdicts. I'm just saying that there is money that are connected to someone of the Russian-born descent of someone who had something to do, some business with the Kremlin. There's also the same going on for the academia, where there's a lot of money in Oxford, there's School of Humanities.
Dmitry Firtash,
of
now
course.
currently indicted. He's sponsored a Cambridge Foundation.
Right. There's you name it. There are Arsenal, there are football teams, there's sports. It's everywhere. It's in real estate. So economically, again, culturally, again, you can dig in and you can find it everywhere. There's a soft war where seemingly innocent projects turned out to be sponsored by the Kremlin. And I assure you that they don't sponsor something just out of altruistic motives. There's always some goal there. There's a budget there, and it goes towards slowly converting the mind, just whitewashing the reputation and so forth. So just on these three levels, political, economic, and cultural, we already see a lot, and we can probably go on. So the answer is yes.
And Julie asks, how does the wider population now feel about Putin?
In Russia, you're saying, the wider population.
That would be a little harder for me to answer, because again, I left Russia decades ago and I haven't been there for 15 years, but I do speak to people there. So according to these people, say according to Anastasia Vasilyeva yesterday, there are a lot of people who understand the gravity of Putin's crimes, discretions, according to Anastasia, but who are too scared to take any action. And that's one side of it. Another side, and she mentioned it, and other people talk about it, that a lot of people are simply brainwashed. There's a very powerful propaganda machine there. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry that is sponsored directly from the Kremlin and that is working full power 24/7 for over 20 years, broadcasting directly in people's brains. And of course it works, and nobody is susceptible. I mean, we all are susceptible. Nobody is immune to it. I assure you, Peter Hardip, if you were to be placed in front of the Russian state television for a week, you will end up being a slightly different person at the end. So,
and it's also, but it's not, the interesting thing people forget about the Internet Research Agency, you know, the Olgina Troll Farm, which is part of Wagner, which was the operation, one of, not the only operation, but the one we know most about involved in Russian interference and involved in Brexit, was first designed for use on the Russian population, was it? Especially the Ukrainian, you know, when the Maidan and the revolution happened in Ukraine, that's what the prototype was built for.
Yes, they didn't know that they could do it remotely. Yes. Actually, in fact, the first time supposedly that they celebrated their victory with champagne was in 2014, I believe, or in the very beginning of 2015, where they did their hot dog action in New York on Times Square. They posted an event on Facebook saying that everybody who will attend the event will get a free hot dog. And then they had a camera installed somewhere on the street pole, and they were watching people coming in. And that's when they started to drink champagne and saying, we can do that.
And after that, just so people know, this is one of many troll farms. They're spending $50 million a year. Has something like 200, 300 English-speaking Russians working on their troll farm. So it's a big operation.
Yeah, it's a big operation.
So Liz is saying that she's pleased that we're focusing on constitutional governance, as opposition parties seem unable to come together to do so. And she's asking Zarina, do you think that constitutional governance is something that we should be trying to talk to our citizens about and get a conversation going on?
I certainly agree with that there should be a conversation, and I probably...
You went through, just thinking about it, you went through, I think you remember just about the Soviet era, and then this new constitution came forward. You were in St. Petersburg, you saw these democratic structures set up, you know, so you know what constitutions look like and how they can go wrong.
It is more complicated than this, because formally, technically, there was a constitution in the USSR. It's not like it didn't exist. It just, everything was skewed there. And so it was in the so-called democratic Russia. It really never was constitutional. These poor people never got to experience democracy at its best. So again, this is a very nuanced question that will require a little bit more of thinking.
Maybe talking as an American citizen for 15 years, how you felt on January the 6th.
It was terrible. I mean, it was devastating. Actually, a number of colleagues who have podcasts, we were all talking to each other, and Zev, Zev, I forgot his last name. They have a very popular podcast, and they were doing a podcast, and they asked me to join to comment, and I was so devastated that I couldn't do it. I just couldn't comment. It was as if not just the carpet, the earth was being taken from underneath our feet.
Yeah, and did it feel like a replay of what you felt maybe more slow motion happened in Russia?
Yes and no. It was in a way more horrifying, because back in the Soviet Union and Russia, you expected something horrific. You know, it was a part of the deal. It came with the whole scenario. Here in America, it was really very PTSD raw material, because it is, like if you are, I always think about it, if you are in an abusive relationship, you escape it, and then you find somebody else, another partner, and you think that everything is going fine, and then suddenly in 15 years, it turns out that it's actually all the same.
This is a movie.
And it was really, I was having PTSD flashes, and a lot of us, refugees were having that. It was absolutely terrifying, worse than it was when we had a coup in 1991.
So that was
Yeah.
the parallel, wasn't it?
Yeah,
Tanks
because
fight.
that you expected that from the communists. I did not expect that from the United States of America.
One of the things that we were talking about in the past week in terms of the British constitutional setup is that it's really striking because obviously in America the inquiry into the Capitol attack is now beginning, and there are hours and hours of testimony which everybody can watch live streamed. Everything is, the gravitas of it is all very serious, and we've had officers crying and saying how devastated they were about what happened. And then there's that juxtaposition between the interview that we had with Laura Kuenssberg and Dominic Cummings,
Giving away my article for next week.
which I think I helped commission. But
Tell everybody the outcome.
no, but this notion that Cummings was sort of smirking.
You're giving away the whole story here.
God, you're really slowing things down. It's not helpful. Anyway, you have to read the article, guys.
You'll have to read the article.
My
That's
God.
why.
You have to read the article, but let me just chime in and make this, because something happened today equally shocking for me in America to another journalist friend, and I believe he authored some articles for Byline Times, Grant Stern.
Oh, I know Grant
Yeah,
Stern,
he's a fantastic researcher.
He exposed Steve Bannon's criminality.
And many other things. We've been working with him, collaborating on different things from the beginning of Trump era. And he's a fantastic journalist with a lot of integrity, very powerful, a lot of followership. And so he was at a press conference today. I don't know if you've seen it. No. And he asked a question to the Republican representative. Why was he opposed to the bipartisan committee on January 6th? As soon as he asked this question, there were two policemen who grabbed him physically and carried him out of the premises and almost injuring him. I saw the picture of him. Later he was injured. I didn't have time to look into details. I just wrote to him saying if he's okay. And of course he was shocked, and he's going to, he's not going to leave it unanswered. No. But I mean, these kind of things were unthinkable before in America. Yeah. And now again, comparing the political climate and the whole repression theme, how is it possible that it could happen to a friend of mine in the United States, where the freedom of speech is the number one, the most important thing?
The First Amendment.
Yes, the First Amendment.
I'm going to finish that point because if one believes they have a voice, they have to use it. So the point was that the comparison between the inquiry that was happening in America, juxtaposed with this notion that Cummings was just smirking while Laura Kuenssberg was asking him about the Brexit campaign, and he was talking about this apparent takeover of British democracy, and yet all we had was in smirking and one interview which didn't really touch on Cambridge Analytica or any of the electoral law breaking of the Vote Leave campaign, and that's it. So it was just interesting, wasn't it, to contrast the two systems. But we're going to have some quick fire questions. So Vicky asks, are Russians more aware or alert to media propaganda than people in the UK?
Depends on the Russian, but generally, yes. I would say so, especially the older generation, people who got to live in the Soviet Union at some point, even as kids, are very aware that there are two levels of narratives always, the formal one and the real one.
Great. And David is asking, how do you think Putin will be defeated eventually? And Alan says, will he be defeated eventually?
Great questions. I wish I was Miss History looking back, answering you, David and Alan. And the last question, will he be defeated eventually? Yes, he will.
But will he go out in a box? That's what they say. Putin will not leave power.
Well, I'm not a clairvoyant, and I don't read tarot cards, so I can't tell you that. I just know that he will be. It's very possible that that would be the natural way of all things gone. It's possible. Hopefully there will be some justice, but one way or another, this too shall end. And we will hopefully see the end to it. As for the first question, David, how do I think he will be defeated eventually? How? It could be either just wishful thinking, and I'm not going to do any sci-fi here for you guys. So, I mean, is it possible? We were talking about this yesterday with Anastasia Vassilieva, actually, off the record. And we were thinking, and the truth is, we don't know. We just don't know. I would be lying to you if we said, like, we can think or dream of various scenarios, as Navalny phrases, of the beautiful Russia of the future. But the truth is that Russia never really lived that democracy that you guys are having here, imperfect as is. The closest it came to very relatively well-doing and stable was just before the World War I. And also it wasn't for everyone. I mean, the peasants suffered horribly, and so were the workers suffering in the cities, and that's why the revolution happened. But there was this large
First Duma, the first revolution.
layer of population that lived quite well, at least at the time, it seems like, from reading history. But ever since then, there was not one time, not one day, I should say, in this country's history when there were some terrible disasters or genocides or calamities. There's always something that I can only hope that the day will come and that the Russian people will enjoy the regular life without dictators or repressions, and here's
to that.
Well, Zarina, thank you so much for staying around for our Q&A and joining us on Byline TV.
Anytime.
I know you'll be back because you've always got lots of insights. And Peter, thank you for your insights. And that's about it from us tonight. As always, thank you for your support. Please keep helping us to spread the word. If there's somebody who hasn't seen Byline TV or who isn't a subscriber of Byline Times, please do encourage them to take a look at what we do. One of the things that our viewers and readers often say to me is that how do we get Byline TV and Byline Times to people who most need to view this content, i.e. out of our own circles? And that is a very fair point. And the answer to that is we need your help to do it. So keep spreading the word, and we'll see you back here at 8 p.m. next week. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.